The gravel crunched under the tires of my old pickup truck, a sound that usually signaled the end of a long workday. But today, it signaled a beginning. In my breast pocket sat the deed to the barmy. Lake Ranch, 900 acres of rolling hills, ancient oaks, and a pristine lake that shimmered like a sapphire under the Texas sun. My grandfather, Silas Miller, had left it all to me. Growing up, the ranch was my sanctuary. Silas was a man of few words and deep roots, and he'd spent 50 years keeping developers at bay. When the lawyers called to tell me the land was mine, they also dropped a bombshell. A high-end gated community called The Heights had sprung up right against the eastern boundary of the ranch during the 3 years I was working overseas. I pulled up to the old ranch house, a modest cedar-planked home, and stepped out. The air smelled of sage and water, but as I looked toward the eastern ridge, my heart dropped. There, perched high on a hill that definitely belonged to my family's property line, sat a monstrosity of white marble and glass. It was a sprawling, 3-story mansion that looked like a museum had crashed into a shopping mall. "What in the world?" I muttered. I didn't even unpack my bags. I grabbed the survey maps from the glove box and hiked toward the ridge. As I climbed, I noticed something even more baffling. A pristine, paved road winding through the ranch's tall grass, leading straight to the mansion. There was even a sign, The Heights, Phase 2, Private Access. Standing on the ridge, I realized the house wasn't just near my land. It was smack in the middle of it. A woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat and a flowing linen dress was standing on the massive back terrace, holding a wine glass and barking orders at a landscaper. "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward the stone retaining wall she'd built over a patch of my grandfather's favorite bluebonnets. The woman turned. Her face was tight, her eyes hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. She looked at my dusty boots and faded jeans with visible disdain. "This is private property," she said, her voice sharp and practiced. "The service entrance is half a mile back. Use it." "I'm not the service," I said, stopping at the edge of the wall. "I'm Elias Miller. I own this ranch." She let out a short, hollow laugh. "I'm Karen Vance, president of the Heights Homeowners Association." "And you're mistaken. This is Lot 42. I purchased it from the developer 2 years ago. Then the developer sold you land they didn't own," I replied, holding up the survey. "This ridge, that lake view, and the ground your pool is currently sitting on belong to the Barham Ranch. You're trespassing." Karen stepped closer, her heels clicking on the expensive stone. "Listen, Mr. Miller, if that is your name. My husband is a senior partner at the city's largest firm. We have an ironclad agreement with the HOA. This land was cleared for development. If you have a grievance, take it up with the board. Now, please leave before I call security." The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and property surveys. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah, who grew up in the next town over, was stunned. "Elias, it's a mess," Sarah told me, spreading maps across her desk. "The developer, a shell company that's already filed for bankruptcy, filed a clerical error in the county records while you were out of the country. They shifted the boundary line by nearly 500 yards to include the ridge. They sold Lot 42 to Karen Vance for $3 million. She didn't just build a house. She convinced the HOA to use your land for their community park and private road. Can we move them?" I asked. "The law says yes, but Karen Vance and the HOA are already suing us," Sarah said with a grimace. "They're claiming adverse possession and equitable estoppel. They want the court to grant them the land because they've already invested millions in improving it." I looked at the photos of the ridge. They hadn't improved it. They'd scarred it. They'd cut down oaks that were 200 years old to make room for an infinity pool. "Let them sue," I said. "We're going to court." The legal battle lasted nearly a year. It was a war of attrition. Karen Vance didn't just fight in the courtroom. She fought in the court of public opinion. She posted videos on social media, claiming a bitter squatter was trying to tear down her dream home. She tried to get the HOA to fine me for the eyesore of my grandfather's old barn, claiming it lowered their property values even though it had been there since 1940. The HOA board, led by Karen, sent me weekly violation notices for things like unauthorized livestock, my 2 horses, and improper grass height. "You don't have jurisdiction over my ranch. I told her during a heated encounter at the property line. "We have an easement," she screamed. "This road is the only access to the new phase. You can't block it." "Watch me," I said. The climax came in a wood-paneled courtroom in downtown Austin. Judge Harrison was a no-nonsense man who had been on the bench for 30 years. Karen sat on the right side of the aisle, surrounded by a fleet of lawyers and a group of concerned neighbors from the Heights. She wore a black suit that cost more than my truck. Sarah presented the evidence, the original 1920 deed, the satellite imagery showing the encroachment, and the fraudulent filings by the bankrupt developer. Karen's lead lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, Mrs. Vance acted in good faith. She has spent $5 million on the construction of this home and hundreds of thousands, more on the infrastructure for the community. To force her to vacate would be an astronomical financial loss. We propose a forced sale. Mr. Miller should be compensated at the 1920s land value, and the boundary should be officially moved." The courtroom went quiet. Karen smirked at me from across the room. She thought money could solve anything. She thought my heritage had a price tag. Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, do you wish to speak?" I stood up. I didn't have a prepared speech. I just thought about Silas. "Your Honor, that land isn't a lot, it's a legacy. My grandfather spent his life protecting that lake so it wouldn't be surrounded by concrete and chemical runoff, lawns. Mrs. Vance didn't build a dream home. She built a monument to her own ego on someone else's porch. You can't pay for the right to steal someone's history." The judge looked at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at Karen. "Mrs. Vance, did you or your title company ever conduct an independent survey before breaking ground?" Karen hesitated. The developer provided the survey. "We trusted the HOA's recommendation." "The HOA," the judge said dryly, "of which you are the president?" "Yes," she whispered. Judge Harrison sighed. "This is one of the most egregious cases of property encroachment I have seen in my career. Mrs. Vance, you and the HOA ignored the basic due diligence of land ownership because you wanted that view. You didn't just build on the line. You built over it by 300 feet. He cleared his throat and began reading the ruling. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Elias Miller. The clerical error in the county records is void. The boundary stands as originally deeded in 1920. Furthermore, I deny the request for a forced sale. Mr. Miller is under no obligation to sell his heritage to cover for your negligence." Karen's face went pale. "But the house? What about the house?" "The house is an illegal structure," Judge Harrison said coldly. "You have 60 days to remove the encroachment. That means the house, the road, and the retaining wall. If they are not removed, Mr. Miller has the right to demolish them at your expense." The courtroom erupted. Karen slumped into her chair, her hand over her mouth. The HOA members behind her began arguing. Loudly, they realized their private road was about to become a dead end into a fence. The next 2 months were chaotic. Karen tried to appeal, but the ruling was airtight. She tried to offer me $10 million to buy the entire 900 acres. I declined. "I don't want your money, Karen," I told her as she stood on my porch looking desperate. "I want my ridge back." "You're a monster," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You're destroying my life." "No," I said quietly. "You built your life on a foundation that didn't belong to you. I'm just reclaiming mine." The HOA was forced to pay for the removal. It was a logistical nightmare. Since they couldn't save the house without it collapsing, they had to dismantle it. For weeks, the sound of jackhammers and heavy machinery echoed across the lake. I watched from my porch as the marble columns were hauled away. The infinity pool was filled with dirt, and the paved road was ripped up. The most satisfying part wasn't the destruction. It was the restoration. Part of the court's ruling required the HOA to pay for the ecological remediation of the land. They had to pay for a forestry team to plant mature oaks where the old ones had been felled. They had to replant the native grasses and bluebonnets. On the final day of the court-ordered deadline, Karen Vance was there to sign off on the site's vacation. She looked older, her bravado completely gone. The HOA had ousted her as president, and the neighbors she had represented were now suing her for the loss of their road access and the drop in their property values. She stood on the dirt where her living room used to be. "Are you happy now?" she asked as I walked up. "I'm at peace," I said. "There's a difference." She got into her car and drove away, leaving the heights behind forever. A year later, the ranch felt like itself again. The scars on the ridge were fading. The new oaks had taken root, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The lake was quiet, free from the hum of construction and the glare of modern floodlights. I sat on the ridge, right where Karen's Lot 42 had once been. The grass was knee-high now, waving in the wind. The boundary fence was back where it belonged, a simple, sturdy wire fence that marked the edge of my world. The HOA was still there, tucked away behind the trees, but they were quieter now. They had learned a very expensive lesson about boundaries and the man who lived beyond them. I looked out over the 900 acres. Silas would have been proud. The land wasn't just a property. It was a promise. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I knew that some things are simply not for sale. I had inherited a lake ranch, and though a mansion had tried to claim it, the land had won. Karen had built her dream on sand, and she'd paid for it in every way a person could. But as for me, I had my ridge, my lake, and my peace. The Barham was whole again.